The night my twins were born, I made a decision that would follow me for the rest of my life. I have replayed that night more times than I can count, not because I didn't understand what I was doing, but because I understood it too well. I was standing in a delivery room I'd worked in for over a decade. Same machines, same sharp scent of disinfectant, same quiet urgency that settles into your bones when a life is about to arrive. I had delivered thousands of babies before that night. I knew exactly what every sound meant, every number on every monitor. This time was different. This time, the babies were mine. Before I tell you what I did, I need you to understand something. This isn't a story about ignorance. It isn't about confusion or panic in the heat of the moment. It's about a choice, a clean one, a deliberate one. And if you think you know what you'd do in my place, don't answer yet. Because that night, I erased one of my daughters. If you believe secrets always surface, like this video right now, and comment truth, not for me, for yourself. The first cry came at 2:17 a.m., a strong cry, clear lungs, perfect tone. I felt my shoulders loosen. I remember smiling behind my mask as I announced the time of birth, my voice calm, steady, professional. The nurse beside me, Anis, smiled back. She was young, new, eager. She trusted me completely. I lifted my first daughter into the light. And in that single moment, everything I had built my life around cracked. I didn't need tests. I didn't need a second opinion. I didn't need time. Years of training spoke faster than thought ever could. The signs were there, subtle to most, obvious to me. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't break. What broke was something else, something much deeper. I thought of headlines. I thought of interviews. I thought of hospital wings with my name etched into polished stone. I thought of the future I had already mapped out for my family, step by step, year by year. And this child did not fit inside it. I didn't say anything out loud at first. I wrapped her. I turned slightly, just enough so my wife, Verity, couldn't see her face clearly from the bed. Verity was exhausted, glowing, trusting. She reached out weakly, smiling, tears in her eyes. "Is she okay?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. That was the first lie of the night. I handed the baby to Anis and leaned in close enough that only she could hear me. "Take her," I said quietly. She hesitated. "Doctor." "Do what's necessary." 3 words. Soft, controlled, final. Her eyes searched my face, looking for something. Panic, confusion, doubt. She didn't find it. What she found was authority and fear, not hers, mine. The second twin arrived minutes later, healthy, loud, perfect. I held him up proudly this time. I let Verity see everything. I let her laugh. I let her cry. I let her believe the story I was already rewriting. While she drifted in and out of exhaustion, I adjusted her medication myself. A little more than necessary. Enough to make the edges blur. Enough to make memories unreliable. By morning, the version of events she would remember was the version I chose. People like to believe lies are complicated. They're not. They're simple. They only work if you repeat them with confidence. By sunrise, one twin existed. The other was already gone. I told myself I was protecting my family. I told myself I was sparing my wife. I told myself I was preventing a lifetime of struggle. But here's the truth I avoided for years. I wasn't afraid of raising that child. I was afraid of being seen with her. What would you do if your child shattered the future you had planned? Would you call it strength to walk away? Or would you call it cowardice? That question followed me long after the hospital room was cleaned, long after the paperwork was filed, long after a small white casket was lowered into the ground with my wife clinging to my arm, believing she was burying a daughter who had never taken a breath. I stood there, composed, respected, grieving in all the ways expected of a man like me. And no one suspected a thing. What happens when the truth refuses to stay buried? I didn't know it then. But it was already on its way back to me. By the time Verity woke fully, the room had been rearranged. Not physically, emotionally. Monitors had been reset, notes rewritten, faces adjusted into practiced expressions of sympathy. I had watched my colleagues do this for years. Soft voices, lowered eyes, careful pauses between sentences. I knew exactly how grief was delivered. I knew the rhythm of it. This time, I conducted it. I sat beside my wife and took her hand. She was still heavy with exhaustion, her thoughts moving slowly, like she was underwater. She smiled when she saw me, searching my face for reassurance. "Where's the other baby?" she asked. I waited just long enough to make the pause feel real. Then I said, "We lost her." The words landed quietly. No drama, no raised voice, just a statement of fact. Her fingers tightened around mine. "What do you mean, lost her?" I looked down. That was important. Doctors who look down are believed. "There were complications," I said. "She didn't make it." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tears filled her eyes before she seemed to understand why. Her body reacted faster than her mind. I had seen this exact moment in countless families. I had always been on the other side of it. Now I was the one shaping the memory. "She didn't suffer," I added quickly. "It was fast." Another lie. Easier than the first. She cried then, quietly, the kind of crying that doesn't disturb anyone else in the room. I wrapped my arm around her and held her while she shook, my face calm, my heart locked behind a door I refused to open. I told myself this was mercy. By noon, the paperwork was done. A name was written on a form and sealed away. A time of death was recorded for a child who was still breathing somewhere else in the building. That part required precision. Numbers matter. Dates matter. Especially when you are erasing someone cleanly. I signed where I needed to sign. That was the moment the lie became permanent. Anis didn't come back into the room. I noticed immediately. She was thorough, usually, always hovering, always checking, always asking if there was anything else I needed. Her absence should have bothered me more than it did. Instead, I felt relief. If she stayed away, I didn't have to look at her. I didn't have to wonder what she was thinking. I didn't have to see judgment where I needed obedience. Later that afternoon, I stood alone in the hallway outside the nursery window, staring at my son. He slept peacefully, unaware of the weight I had placed on his life before it even began. He would grow up with every door open to him, every advantage, every opportunity. He would grow up as I intended. I told myself that made me a good father. That night, Verity asked if we could see the baby again, the one we had lost. She wanted closure. Mothers always do. I shook my head gently. "It's better if you remember her the way she was meant to be," I said. "Not like that." She nodded, trusting me. Trusting the man who had delivered her children. Trusting her husband. The funeral was small, private, respectful. I chose the location. I chose the time. I chose the words. People came. They offered condolences. They said things like, "You're so strong, and I don't know how you're holding it together." Neither did I. As the casket was lowered, Verity collapsed against me. Her sobs tore through her body, raw and uncontrollable. I held her upright, steady as stone, absorbing her grief without letting it reach my own. If I let myself feel it, everything would fall apart. So I didn't. That was how the lie survived its first test. Years passed like that. Smooth, successful, untouched. At home, we avoided the subject. Not because it was forbidden, but because it was settled. A tragedy already filed away, categorized, mourned. Something that had happened to us, not something we had done. At work, my reputation grew. Interviews, panels, donations. My name became a brand, synonymous with excellence, discipline, vision. No one ever asked about the twin, and I never offered more than a somber nod when it came up. But lies don't stay quiet forever. They wait. They stretch themselves thin across time, hoping you'll forget they're there, hoping the world will move fast enough that the ground never cracks beneath your feet. I built my life on that hope. What I didn't understand, what I refused to consider, was that the truth doesn't need anger to return. It only needs breath. And somewhere out there, the breath I tried to silence was getting stronger. Time has a way of rewarding people who stay quiet. That's the part no one talks about. The months after the funeral were calm. Too calm. Life didn't punish me the way I expected it to. It didn't collapse. It didn't hesitate. It moved forward, as if nothing terrible had happened at all. Verity healed physically, slowly, then fully. She returned to smiling in public, hosting dinners, attending events with me on her arm. When people expressed sympathy months later, she would nod politely, her grief already shaped into something manageable, something distant. At home, the room meant for the twins stayed closed for a while. Then, one day, without ceremony, it became a guest room. No discussion, no argument, just a quiet decision that matched the rest of our life. We never said her name. At the hospital, my schedule filled faster than ever. I was invited into rooms where decisions were made. Boards, committees, panels. I spoke about ethics, about responsibility, about the importance of protecting life. People listened. They always did. Sometimes during late surgeries, I would catch my reflection in the glass and study it longer than necessary. I would look for signs, cracks, something that suggested the truth was visible on my face. It never was. The lie aged well. That should have been my first warning. There were moments, small, inconvenient ones, that tried to break through. A nurse mentioning twins during rounds. A patient asking how many children I had. A baby crying down the hall in a pitch that matched a memory I refused to touch. Each time I adjusted, redirected, smiled, corrected. People like me are trained to control environments, to manage outcomes, to keep emotions from interfering with performance. I treated my own life the same way. The only person who didn't follow the script was Anis. She transferred departments not long after that night. No goodbye, no explanation. I told myself it was coincidence. Young nurses move around. They get overwhelmed. They leave. Still, when her name appeared in my inbox months later, my pulse changed. It was brief. "Hope you're well, doctor. Just checking in." No accusation, no demand. Nothing I could point to and call a threat. I didn't respond. Silence had worked so far. I trusted it more than any conversation. Years passed. My son grew, strong, curious, confident. He looked like me when he smiled. Verity adored him. I watched them together and told myself that this life, was proof that my decision had been right. But every birthday came with a shadow. I would stand there, clapping, smiling for photos, while counting quietly in my head. There should have been 2 candles. I never said it out loud. I never let the thought finish forming. I learned how to interrupt myself before memory could become emotion. That's another skill no one teaches you. How to stop your own mind. From the outside, my life looked complete. The kind of life people point to when they talk about success. When they say things like, "He did everything right." I believed them, until the day I didn't. It started with a phone call from my assistant. "There's a young woman asking for you," she said. "She says it's personal." I almost told her to send the woman away. Almost. Instead, I asked a single question. "How old is she?" There was a pause. Teenage, maybe. I ended the call without another word. Nothing happened after that. No second call. No follow-up. Days passed. Then weeks. But something had shifted. I began noticing things I had trained myself not to see. Social media posts, news articles, faces in crowds that made my chest tighten for reasons I couldn't justify. I told myself I was tired, overworked, but deep down, I knew the truth had started moving again. Silence has a cost. It demands constant maintenance, attention, energy. You don't get to relax when you build your life on a mission. You just get better at pretending you are. I had spent years pretending, and the longer I did, the heavier the weight became. I began to understand something I had avoided since that night in the delivery room. Erasing someone doesn't remove them from the world. It only removes them from your control. I had been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't whether the truth would come out. It was when and who it would come from. I wish I could say the fear hit me all at once. It didn't. Fear arrives quietly when you've spent years convincing yourself you're untouchable. It shows up as tension in places you didn't know could ache, as impatience, as a sudden need to control details that never mattered before. I became careful in ways I hadn't been. I reviewed guest lists before events. I asked for background briefs on donors. I requested tighter security at public appearances, framing it as professionalism, not paranoia. No one questioned it. People rarely question men who appear confident. The press conference was supposed to be routine. A new surgical wing. A funding announcement. Cameras. Applause. A controlled environment where I would speak, smile, and leave without incident. I had done this dozens of times. That morning, as I adjusted my tie in the mirror, a thought surfaced without warning. What if she's alive? I pushed it away immediately. Dead children don't grow up. Dead children don't ask questions. Dead children stay where you put them. Still, my reflection looked different that day. Not guilty, not afraid, just alert, like an animal that senses movement before it understands danger. On the drive to the hospital, Verity called. "Good luck," she said. "You'll be great." Her voice was warm, proud, the same voice that had trusted me completely for years. The same voice that believed our story because I had told it so well. "Thank you," I replied. Another clean lie. Inside the conference hall, reporters settled into their seats. Microphones were tested. My name was displayed behind the podium in bold letters. I waited backstage, listening to the low murmur of conversation bleed through the walls. I felt steady. That was the most unsettling part. When you expect consequences to announce themselves loudly, you miss the moment they walk in quietly and sit down. I stepped out to applause. Familiar faces, friendly nods, cameras rising in unison. I began speaking. Words flowed the way they always had, measured, confident, polished. I spoke about progress, about responsibility, about the future of care. Each sentence landed exactly where I intended. Halfway through, my eyes drifted across the room. That's when I saw her. She wasn't doing anything unusual. She wasn't standing. She wasn't waving. She wasn't trying to be seen. She was listening. Young, composed, her posture straight, her attention fixed on me with an intensity that didn't match the room. Everyone else was watching the performance. She was watching me. For a brief second, my mind searched for explanations. A patient, a donor's daughter, a student. Then she tilted her head slightly, and recognition hit me in a place I couldn't shield. I faltered, just for a breath. It was small enough that most people missed it. Not enough to stop the cameras, not enough to raise suspicion, but enough. She stood. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor cut through the room far louder than it should have. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice steady, not loud, not emotional, just clear. "I have a question." The moderator hesitated. I didn't move. She stepped forward one pace. "You told the world your daughter died," she continued. "You told your wife she never took a breath." The room froze. My pulse roared in my ears, but my body refused to react. Years of control locked me in place. She met my eyes. "I'm standing right here. No anger, no accusation, no demand, just the truth." Cameras surged toward her. Phones lifted. Whispers spread like electricity across the room. At that moment, I understood something I had avoided for years. The truth doesn't need permission. It doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need revenge. It only needs one voice, steady enough to say what everyone else was afraid to hear. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. And for the first time since the night my twins were born, I was no longer in control of the story. Before the night everything broke, my name carried weight. When people heard Dr. Thaddeus Aurelius, they didn't ask questions. They nodded. They stepped aside. They trusted me. Trust wasn't something I chased, it followed me, shaped by years of precision, discipline, and outcomes that spoke louder than character ever could. Patients requested me by name. Administrators deferred to my judgment. Younger doctors watched how I moved through hallways and copied the way I spoke, the way I paused. Before answering, the way I never appeared uncertain even when decisions carried risk. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Authority settled around me naturally, reinforced by results. Lives saved. Complications avoided. Papers published. Panels attended. I became the kind of man institutions leaned on when they needed certainty. And I gave it to them. In public, I was calm, controlled, measured. I spoke about responsibility as if it were instinct, about ethics as if they were simple, about medicine as if it were immune to emotion. People believed that meant I was good. What they didn't see was how carefully curated that image was. Every success reinforced the expectation that I would never misstep, that I would never falter, that I would never be the man whose life veered off course. I didn't just carry that expectation. I enforced it. Verity and I fit together the way people admire from a distance. She was composed, articulate, graceful without effort. The kind of woman people described as grounded. At events, she stood beside me easily, offering warmth where I offered certainty. Together, we looked balanced. That balance was intentional. We met when my career was already rising, when my life had direction and speed. Verity understood what it meant to live alongside ambition. She didn't compete with it. She supported it. She adjusted when my schedule changed. She learned to measure time in windows, between surgeries and conferences. We didn't fight often, not because everything was perfect, but because disagreement required vulnerability. And vulnerability didn't fit into the life I was building. Instead, we maintained harmony. People envied that. They didn't see how silence replaced conversation, how decisions were made quickly and efficiently, often without discussion, how control disguised itself as stability. Verity trusted me, fully, completely. That trust became the foundation everything else stood on. I didn't grow up wealthy. I didn't inherit influence. Everything I had was built deliberately, step by step, through discipline and sacrifice. Legacy mattered to me because nothing had been handed down. I believed legacy had to be protected, curated, preserved from anything that could weaken it. That belief shaped how I viewed the future, how I imagined my children, my family, my name extending forward without distortion. I wanted continuation, not complication. Order, not unpredictability. I told myself this was my responsibility. In truth, it was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being judged. Fear that one visible imperfection would overshadow everything I had built. I watched colleagues stumble, watched reputations bend under pressure, watched how quickly admiration could shift when someone failed to meet expectation. I learned from them. I promised myself I would never give the world a reason to doubt me. By the time Verity became pregnant, my life was no longer just mine. Hospitals relied on me. Donors invested in me. Boards referenced me. My absence was noticed. My presence was assumed. Pressure didn't arrive as stress. It arrived as responsibility layered so thick it became invisible. I couldn't afford mistakes. Not professionally, not personally. When people congratulated us on starting a family, they spoke as if it were the final proof that my life was complete. As if children were the last achievement on a list I had been checking off my entire life. I smiled, thanked them, accepted the praise. Inside, I calculated. Children meant exposure, visibility, variables I couldn't fully manage. But I told myself preparation solved everything. When we announced the pregnancy, the response was immediate. Messages, gifts, articles, quiet speculation that turned into open celebration when it was revealed there were twins. People loved the symmetry of it. 2 children. A perfect number. Verity glowed in a way I hadn't seen before. She spoke about names, about nurseries, about futures that felt warm and open. I listened. I nodded. I didn't interrupt. At work, colleagues joked about my next chapter. Reporters asked how fatherhood would change me. I answered carefully, always emphasizing balance, intention, responsibility. Everything fits the image. Everything reinforced it. As the due date approached, life slowed just enough to feel manageable. The house was prepared. The hospital schedule adjusted. Everything had a place. Every outcome had been considered. I believed readiness could prevent surprise. The night before delivery, Verity slept peacefully. I didn't. I lay awake beside her, listening to her breathe, staring into the dark, thinking about the future as something fixed and knowable. I had no idea how fragile that belief was. By morning, we would walk into a hospital room together. By nightfall, only one version of our life would survive. The snow started falling hours before Verity's contractions became regular. At first, it was light enough to ignore, just enough to soften the streets and slow traffic. By the time we left the house, it had thickened, coating the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. I drove anyway. Caution was something I practiced professionally, not personally. I had already decided that nothing, not weather, not delay, not circumstance, would interfere with this night going exactly as planned. Verity sat beside me, one hand braced against the seat, the other resting over her stomach. She breathed through each contraction quietly, methodically, trusting me to get her where she needed to be. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded. "They're getting closer." I checked the clock, calculated distance, adjusted speed. Outside, cars slowed. Inside, my focus sharpened. I had walked into emergencies far worse than this. Snow was an inconvenience, not a danger. Cedarwood Medical Center came into view just as another contraction forced Verity to grip my arm. I pulled into the emergency entrance and helped her out, already shifting into the role everyone expected me to play. Doctor first, husband second. The hospital doors slid open, releasing a rush of warmth and sound. Cedarwood at night was a place I knew well. Fewer voices, fewer visitors, a different kind of urgency. The staff recognized me immediately, no questions, no delays. "She's in labor," I said. "Twins." That was all it took. A wheelchair appeared. Papers were bypassed. Verity was moved efficiently, respectfully, quickly. Privilege has a rhythm to it, and Cedarwood knew the beat. As we moved down the hallway, Verity reached for my hand. "You're here," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere," I replied. That was true, just not in the way she understood. Inside the delivery room, preparations moved fast. Equipment checked, monitors attached. I scrubbed in alongside the on-call team, taking my place without hesitation. This was my territory. I felt calm. That should have warned me. Anise was assigned to the room minutes before delivery. She introduced herself with a nervous smile, her hands moving a little too fast as she adjusted equipment. She had the posture of someone still proving herself, eager, attentive, careful not to step out of line. "Dr. Aurelius," she said, clearly aware of who I was. "I'll be assisting tonight." I nodded. "Stay close. Follow my lead." "Yes, sir." She did exactly that. Anise asked the right questions, anticipated needs, watched Verity closely. She did everything the way she'd been taught, the way young nurses are taught, to trust experience, to trust authority, to trust the doctor standing at the center of the room. That trust would matter later. For now, it made things easier. Verity's labor progressed quickly, faster than expected. I adjusted, giving instructions calmly, steadily, my voice grounding the room. "You're doing great," I told Verity. "Just stay with me." She smiled weakly. "I knew you'd take care of me." I believed that too. The first cry came right on schedule. Strong, immediate, alive. I guided the delivery with practiced precision, my hands steady, my mind already moving ahead to the next step. As the baby emerged fully, I lifted her automatically, turning her slightly under the lights. And then, I saw her, not as a father, as a doctor. Years of training spoke instantly. The markers were there, clear enough that denial didn't stand a chance. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't uncertain. It was simply real. My breath stalled. For a brief second, the room felt smaller. I turned my body without thinking, positioning myself so Verity's view was limited. She was exhausted, tears in her eyes, smiling through pain. "Is she okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. The word came easily. Inside, panic surged, not wild, not loud, but sharp and focused, the kind that demands action, the kind that doesn't wait for reflection. I wrapped the baby and handed her to a niece. She looked down at the child, then back at me. Something flickered across her face: confusion, concern, uncertainty. I leaned closer. "Take her," I said quietly. "Doctor," she began. "Do what's necessary." 3 words. Her hesitation lasted half a second. Then training took over. She nodded and stepped back, clutching the baby carefully, her eyes searching my face for instruction I refused to give. There was no pause, no time to think, no time to reconsider. Verity cried out as the next contraction hit, pulling my attention back to the task in front of me. I forced my focus forward, pushing the first delivery out of my mind as if it were already complete. The second twin arrived quickly, healthy, loud, demanding attention. This time, I lifted him without turning away. I held him up proudly, letting Verity see his face clearly. Her tears shifted from pain to joy. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's perfect." I smiled, let myself feel that moment, let myself lean into it. I placed him briefly against her chest, watching her stroke his tiny hand, watching the future I had envisioned snap back into place. Anis did not return to the bedside. I noticed. I chose not to ask why. Verity was exhausted. That was normal. Expected. Useful. As the room settled, I adjusted her medication myself. No one questioned it. I was her doctor, her husband, the most qualified person in the room. "A little more," I told the anesthetist. "She's had a long night." Verity blinked slowly, her grip on my hand loosening. "I feel sleepy," she murmured. "That's okay," I said. "Rest." Her eyes closed. The room quieted. I watched as the edges of her awareness softened, as memory slipped out of reach. I knew exactly how long it would take. I knew exactly what would remain clear and what would not. By morning, the story would already be written. One child was born, one child was lost, and no one would question it. Not yet. By morning, the story was ready. I said it calmly, slowly, with just enough detail to feel real and just enough restraint to discourage questions. Doctors learn early that tone matters more than words. Say something with certainty and people accept it. When Verity woke, she was groggy, her thoughts unsteady. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand the way a grieving husband is expected to. "We lost her," I said. Her brow tightened. "Lost? Who?" "The first baby," I replied. "There were complications." Silence followed. Then confusion. Then understanding arrived all at once, heavy and cruel. "She was alive," Verity said. It wasn't a question. "She was," I answered, "but not for long." I spoke carefully, avoiding specifics that could be challenged later. I framed it as inevitability, something that happened despite effort, despite expertise. She searched my face for reassurance, for explanation, for someone to blame. All she found was me. By the time the nurse entered the room, Verity was crying quietly into my shoulder. The narrative had taken hold. One baby survived. One baby did not. Paper makes lies durable. Forms were completed efficiently. Times recorded. Causes listed. I knew which phrases discouraged scrutiny. I knew how to write around truth without touching it. No one questioned my entries. No one asked why I was the one filling them out. Authority closes doors before doubt can enter. A name was added to a record and sealed away. A name that would never be spoken aloud again. The system accepted it without hesitation. By noon, the hospital recognized only one living child. That was all it took. The funeral was small by design. Private services invite fewer questions. I told Verity it would be better that way, easier. She nodded, trusting me even through grief. The casket was closed. I said it was for her own good. Friends stood beside us, offering condolences. They spoke softly, respectfully, the way people do when tragedy follows success. Some said we were strong. Others said life was unfair. No one suspected the truth. As the service ended, Verity collapsed against me, her body shaking as grief finally found its voice. I held her upright, steady, offering comfort I didn't feel. I watched the casket lowered into the ground, and said nothing. Grief changes people slowly. At first, Verity barely spoke. She moved through the house quietly, holding our son often, as if afraid to let go. At night, she cried herself to sleep, whispering apologies to a child she believed she had failed. I told her it wasn't her fault. That part was true. She asked questions sometimes, not many, mostly about what she could have done differently, whether her body had betrayed her. I never corrected her. Her pain made the lie stronger. No one doubts a story soaked in real sorrow. I told myself I had done the right thing. I repeated it silently. At work, at home, in the mirror. I told myself I had protected my family from a future filled with difficulty, that I had spared Verity years of struggle, that I had preserved the life we were meant to have. I told myself this was sacrifice, but the truth pressed in during quiet moments. During late nights when the house was still, when I watched our son sleep and counted breaths. There should have been two. That thought came uninvited. I pushed it away every time. Control, I reminded myself, required discipline. The first crack came unexpectedly. A nurse mentioned twins during a follow-up appointment. It was casual, harmless. Verity stiffened. I corrected the nurse immediately. We had one child. The nurse apologized, but the moment lingered. Later that night, Verity asked, "Why does it feel like people forget?" I had no answer. For the first time, the lie felt heavier than it had the day before. Not because someone suspected, but because I realized I would have to carry it forever. Anis left the delivery floor without asking permission. She moved fast, her steps controlled, her face neutral. Anyone watching would have assumed she was following orders the way she had been trained to do. She carried the baby close, her grip careful, professional. Inside, nothing felt steady. She had heard the words clearly. Do what's necessary. They echoed louder with every step she took away from the room. She told herself she was doing her job, that doctors made decisions nurses didn't question, that her role was to follow through, not interfere. But the baby in her arms was warm, breathing, alive. By the time she reached the parking garage, the snow had thickened. She placed the baby gently in the back seat, checked the straps twice, then sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Her hands were shaking. She pulled out the folded paper Dr. Aurelius had slipped into her pocket earlier. An address, no explanation. She knew what it meant. She started the car anyway. The building stood alone, set back from the road, its windows dark except for a single light near the entrance. Anis parked and sat there for a moment, watching the snow collect on the hood. She had expected something else. A sign, a welcome, something that suggested care. There was none. Inside, the air was stale. A woman behind the desk barely looked up. No questions were asked, no concern shown. The process was mechanical, distant. Anis glanced down the hallway and saw children sitting on thin mattresses, staring at nothing in particular. No toys, no voices, just stillness. Her stomach turned. "This is temporary," she said, her voice unsteady. The woman shrugged. "They all are." Anis looked back at the baby, and something in her settled. Anis signed nothing. She lifted the baby again, tighter this time, and turned back toward the door. "Where are you going?" the woman asked. "I can't leave her here," Anis said. "That's not how this works." Anis met her eyes. "Then it doesn't work." She didn't wait for permission. She didn't explain. She walked out into the snow, her heart pounding harder with every step. For the first time that night, she wasn't following orders. She was choosing. The drive away felt unreal. Every passing mile made it harder to turn back. Anis didn't look at the rearview mirror. She focused on the road, on the baby's breathing, on the simple fact that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Her phone buzzed once. A message from the hospital. She didn't open it. She pulled into a convenience store parking lot hours later, exhausted, unsure where to go next. She sat there, the engine running, the baby sleeping peacefully behind her. Anis rested her forehead against the steering wheel. "I'm not giving you back," she whispered. It wasn't a promise to the world. It was a promise to herself. By morning, Anis had made her decision permanent. She held the baby in her small apartment, watching her eyes flutter open for the first time since the night before. There was no fear in her gaze. Just curiosity. "I need a name for you," Anis said quietly. She thought of light, of resilience, of a life that refused to disappear. "Leora," she said. The baby made a small sound, almost like agreement. Anis smiled for the first time since the delivery. She pressed her forehead gently to the child's and closed her eyes. "You're safe," she whispered. "I won't let anyone erase you." That was the moment power shifted. Not in a hospital room, not in a board meeting, but in a quiet apartment where a woman chose truth over obedience and love over fear. Leora grew the way children usually do, not all at once, not in milestones that impressed anyone, just steadily, quietly, day after day. Anis worked long shifts and learned how to balance exhaustion with attention. They ate dinner late. They talked at the kitchen table. They laughed at things that didn't matter. Leora learned routines early: shoes by the door, backpack on the chair, keys always in the same bowl. "You forgot your lunch," Anis said one morning. Leora smiled. "You'll bring it," Anis sighed. "You're too confident." "I'm right," Leora replied. She was. By the time Leora was old enough to notice differences, Anis didn't explain them with speeches. She answered questions when they came. "Why do I learn slower?" Leora asked once. "Because people learn differently," Anis said. "Is that bad?" No. That was it. Life went on. School was not dramatic. Some days were good, some weren't. Leora struggled with certain subjects and excelled in others. She liked structure. She liked teachers who spoke clearly and didn't rush. In 3rd grade, a boy asked why she talked the way she did. Leora shrugged. "That's how I talk." He nodded. "Okay." They played at recess 10 minutes later. She had friends who argued with her. Friends who copied her homework. Friends who forgot her birthday and made it up to her later. When a teacher once suggested lowering expectations, Anis listened carefully. "Lower than what?" she asked. The teacher didn't have an answer. So they didn't. Music found Leora before she looked for it. An old keyboard sat unused in a community room where Anis volunteered. Leora pressed one key, then another, then several at once. "That's loud," Anis said. Leora grinned. "It's supposed to be." She learned songs by repetition, played them until they felt right. She didn't rush. She didn't perform for approval. She played because she liked the way sound filled space. At a small recital years later, her fingers hesitated once. She paused, then continued. When it ended, she stood and bowed, not because she had been taught to, but because it felt natural. Anis clapped harder than anyone else. Leora was known, not as a symbol, not as a lesson, just as Leora. At the grocery store, people greeted her by name. At the library, she volunteered twice a week, returning books to shelves and correcting mistakes with unapologetic confidence. "This one goes here," she told a librarian once. "You're right," the woman said. Leora smiled. "I usually am." She helped neighbors, babysat when she could, joined community events because she wanted to, not because anyone asked her to. No one made speeches about her. No one needed to. She belonged. By the time Leora was a teenager, her life was full in ordinary ways. Homework, music practice, disagreements with Anis about curfews, apologies. forgiveness, growth. One night, sitting on the couch, Leora asked, "Was I wanted?" Anis didn't hesitate. "I wanted you." "That's enough," Leora said. It was. If you're still watching, comment "seen," because some people only exist when they're witnessed. Leora existed, not because someone allowed her to, but because someone chose her. After the funeral, my career didn't slow. It accelerated. Hospitals liked certainty, and I had become a symbol of it. Grants came easier. Invitations followed. My opinions were quoted. My schedule filled months in advance. People spoke about resilience, about how I had pushed through personal loss. They used my story as proof that discipline conquers grief. I let them. At conferences, I stood on stages and talked about progress and outcomes. I shook hands with donors who wanted their names attached to something clean and impressive. I signed off on expansions and hires and initiatives that carried my signature. Every success stacked neatly on top of the lie. From the outside, it looked like triumph. From the inside, it felt like momentum I couldn't step out of without falling. The cameras loved me. Interviews became routine. My words were clipped into sound bites. My face appeared on screens beside phrases like leadership, innovation, vision. When journalists asked about family, I answered carefully. I spoke about my son. I spoke about balance. I spoke about loss only in past tense, framed as something I had processed and moved beyond. "Hard moments teach clarity," I said once. They printed it. Each appearance tightened the knot I pretended didn't exist. The more visible I became, the more impossible it felt to step away. Too many people believed in the version of me I had presented, and belief, once earned, becomes a demand. The new wing opened on a clear morning. My name was etched into the wall near the entrance, letters polished and permanent. Donors applauded. Administrators smiled. Verity stood beside me, composed, supportive, proud. I gave a speech about legacy. I meant every word, just not in the way they understood. As the ribbon was cut, applause filled the hall. I smiled for photographs, my hand resting on the plaque as if I had nothing to hide. Later, alone in my office, I stared at the reflection in the glass. Success had given me everything I wanted. It had also made the truth harder to survive. Guilt doesn't announce itself loudly. It waits for quiet moments. It surfaced late at night, when the house was still and my son slept down the hall. It surfaced when I replayed memories I had trained myself not to finish. It surfaced when I saw children who shared features I refused to think about. I didn't confess. I didn't collapse. I adjusted. I worked longer hours. I filled silence with productivity. I convinced myself that contribution could offset omission. But no amount of good erased the thing I refused to name. The lie didn't fade. It matured. I found Anis years later. It took resources, quiet inquiries, discretion. She had changed addresses, changed routines. But she hadn't disappeared. I drove to her place alone. When she opened the door, recognition passed across her face instantly. She didn't look surprised. She looked prepared. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. I held out the envelope. Thick, heavy. "This is for you," I said. "For your trouble." She didn't take it. "I don't want your money. You want security," I replied. "You want this to stay buried." She looked past me, toward the room behind her. Toward something I couldn't see. "You don't get to decide that anymore," she said. I felt something tighten in my chest. "Take it," I said again. "No," she replied. I left the envelope on the table and walked out. It was the first time someone had refused me completely, and I knew, as I drove away, that control was no longer guaranteed. Leora didn't wake up one morning suddenly needing answers. The questions crept in slowly, disguised as small gaps that didn't quite close. Why there were no baby pictures before a certain age. Why Anis avoided certain topics without refusing them outright. Why official documents always seemed newer than they should be. At first, Leora ignored it. Life was full. Busy, normal. But questions have weight. When they're unanswered, They press. One evening, while sorting old papers at the kitchen table, Leora held up a document and asked casually, "Why does this start here?" Anise didn't answer right away. "What do you mean?" she asked. "This," Leora said, tapping the page. "There's nothing before it." Anise closed the folder gently. "Some things don't come with records." Leora nodded. She didn't push. Not yet. The confession didn't happen in anger. It happened on a quiet night when there was no reason left to delay it. They sat across from each other, plates untouched. Anise's hands were steady, but her voice wasn't. "There's something you need to know," she said. Leora looked up. "About what?" "About where you came from." Leora waited. "You were born at Cedarwood Medical Center," Anise said. "I was there." Leora didn't react. "I know that you weren't supposed to leave with me," Anise continued. That landed. Anise didn't soften it. She didn't wrap it in comfort. She told the truth the way it had always deserved to be told. She explained the delivery, the order, the address, the building she never walked into fully. "I chose you," she said. "Not because it was easy, because it was right." The room stayed quiet. Leora's hands rested flat on the table. Her breathing slowed, then steadied. "Who are my parents?" she asked. Anise answered. Leora didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't leave the room. She sat with the truth the same way she sat with everything else, fully, without panic. That night, she didn't sleep. She replayed memories with new understanding. Faces, moments, gaps that finally made sense. She felt sadness, but not loss. Anger, but not hatred. Mostly, she felt clarity. She wasn't discarded because she was unworthy. She was hidden because someone else was afraid. That distinction mattered. Anise waited days before asking the question she feared most. "What do you want to do?" Leora didn't answer right away. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said finally. "I don't want apologies that don't change anything." Anise nodded. "I don't want revenge," Leora continued. "That would make me part of a story I didn't choose." That was the moment Anise knew she had done the right thing all those years ago. Leora wasn't driven by bitterness. She was driven by truth. Leora stood by the window one afternoon, watching people pass by, unaware of the choice she had already made. "I want to be seen," she said. Anise turned toward her. "I don't want to destroy anyone," Leora continued. "I just want the truth to exist where the lie has been living." She didn't say his name. She didn't need to. "I'll speak," she said. Once, clearly. Anise swallowed. "It won't be easy." "I know," Leora replied. "But it will be honest." That was the decision that changed everything. Not revenge, not anger, just truth, walking forward on its own terms. The press conference was designed to be uneventful. That was the point. A new initiative. A controlled room, approved questions, familiar faces. The kind of public appearance I had mastered over years of repetition. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters adjusted microphones. Producers signaled countdowns. Everything moved on schedule. I stepped onto the stage to polite applause. My name appeared on the screen behind me, the title beneath it, the image I had built carefully, brick by brick. I began speaking. I talked about progress, about access, about responsibility. The words landed smoothly. I had delivered versions of this speech before. I could feel the rhythm carrying me forward. From the corner of my eye, I saw her. She was seated near the aisle, still, watching, not the stage, me. She didn't rush. She didn't interrupt. She waited until I paused for breath. Then she stood. The movement was small, but it cut through the room instantly. Chairs shifted. Heads turned. A producer raised a hand, unsure whether to stop her. "I have a question," she said. Her voice was steady, calm, clear. I stared at her, my mind scrambling for explanations that refused to settle. The resemblance was there, undeniable once seen. The posture, the eyes, the way she held herself without apology. The moderator hesitated. The cameras stayed on. I didn't say a word. She took one step forward. "You told my mother I was dead." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The room fell silent. Not awkward silence, not confusion. Recognition. Cameras tilted toward her. Reporters froze mid-note. Someone gasped softly near the front row. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She didn't plead. She simply stated a fact that had been buried too long to survive daylight. "I'm here," she continued, "and I've been alive this whole time." I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. I didn't move. I couldn't. The silence broke all at once. Voices overlapped. Questions fired from every direction. Phones lifted. Live feeds exploded beyond the room. Someone shouted my name. Someone else shouted hers. Hashtags formed faster than facts. Screens filled with clips, captions, fragments of truth, finally untethered from control. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. She stood there, unmoving, while the room spun around her. She didn't need to defend herself. She didn't need to explain. The truth was doing the work for her. I had spent years managing perception. It took her one sentence to end it. Security moved too late. The moment had already passed. As microphones were cut and the room dissolved into disorder, she turned and walked out the way she had come in. No escort, no statement, no retreat, just presence. I remained on the stage, surrounded by noise I could no longer control. For the first time, my silence wasn't a strategy. It was exposure. Share this story. Not to cancel anyone, but to remind people truth doesn't need permission. Verity didn't hear the story from Thaddeus. She saw it. A clip sent by a friend. No context. No warning. Just a link and a single message. Is this real? She watched the video alone in the living room. She watched the young woman stand. She watched the room freeze. She heard the sentence that ended the lie. "You told my mother I was dead." Verity's hands went numb. She replayed it. Then again. She watched the girl's face, searching for hesitation, for anger, for anything that suggested confusion. There was none. What she saw instead was certainty. Her phone buzzed again. And again, messages piling up faster than she could read them. She set it down. Her focus narrowed to one truth that refused to soften. The daughter she had mourned was alive, and the man she trusted had known all along. Thaddeus walked in an hour later. He looked smaller than he ever had. Not defeated. Exposed. Verity didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask him to sit. She stood where she was and held out her phone. The video paused on the girl's face. "Who is she?" Verity asked. Thaddeus opened his mouth. "Don't," Verity said. "Answer the question." He swallowed. "Her name is Leora." The name hit her harder than the video. "You told me she died," Verity said. "You stood beside me while I buried her." He nodded once. That nod ended the marriage they had built. He didn't defend himself. There was no space left for that. He told her everything. The delivery, the decision, the sedation, the funeral he had orchestrated with practiced care. Verity listened without interrupting. When he finished, the room stayed quiet. "I trusted you," she said finally. "With my body, with my children, with the truth." "I know," he replied. "That makes it worse," she said. He tried to speak again. She raised her hand. "You don't get to explain fear to me. You don't get to talk about image. You made a choice." Her voice didn't shake. "Now you live with it." There was no dramatic exit. No shouting. No thrown objects. Verity packed a bag calmly, methodically. She moved through the house with the clarity of someone who had reached the end of denial. "I need space," she said. "From you. From this." He didn't argue. The fracture was clean. Permanent. As she stood at the door, she turned back once. "You don't get to decide who your daughter is," she said. "You never did." Then she left. Verity contacted Anis the next morning. Her message was short. "I'm her mother. I need to see her." Anis didn't respond right away. When she did, the reply was just as brief. "She'll decide." Verity accepted that. Days later, sitting alone in a quiet room, she spoke the words out loud for the first time. My daughter, not lost, not gone, alive. And she would meet her, not as a symbol, not as a story, but as a mother ready to face the truth she had been denied. Leora agreed to meet her mother on her own terms, not in a hospital, not in a public place, not where anyone could watch. They chose a quiet room at a community center Anise trusted. No cameras, no explanations, just two women sitting across from each other with years of separation between them. Verity entered first. She stopped when she saw Leora. No gasp, no collapse, just recognition that hit so hard she had to grip the chair to stay standing. Leora stood slowly. They looked at each other without speaking. I thought you were gone, Verity said. I wasn't, Leora replied. Not sharp, not cold, just true. Verity nodded. I know. That was how it began. No rush, no performance, just presence. Verity didn't ask to touch her. She waited. Leora noticed. You can sit, Leora said. Verity did. Her hands rested in her lap, trembling slightly. I don't expect forgiveness, Verity said. I just needed you to know I didn't choose this. I know, Leora replied. That was all Verity needed to hear. They talked for hours, about school, about music, about Anise, about the life that had been lived without her. Verity listened more than she spoke. When she finally said, I'm proud of you, it wasn't to make herself feel better. It was because it was true. Leora met her brother a week later. He was nervous. So was she. They sat across from each other at a small table, both unsure of who should speak first. You play music? He asked. Yes, Leora said. I like building things, he replied. Then you should, she said. He smiled. That was it. No shock, no confusion. Just two siblings finding the simplest place to start. When he asked if she'd always known about him, Leora answered honestly. No, she said. But I'm glad I do now. Thaddeus didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for a chance to speak. Leora agreed, with conditions. No excuses. No explanations framed as reasons. No defense. He sat across from her, older than she remembered from the screen, smaller than the man he had once been. I'm sorry, he said. Not for what it did to me, for what it took from you. He didn't cry. He didn't ask her to understand. I was wrong, he continued, and I will carry that, whether you speak to me again or not. Leora listened. When he finished, she nodded once. That's enough, she said. The reckoning didn't end with exposure. It ended with the truth. Thaddeus stood before his family without titles, without reputation to hide behind. I wasn't afraid of responsibility, he said. I was afraid of what people would think. He paused. Pride told me I could control the future. Fear told me I had to. Image convinced me it was necessary. He looked at Leora. They were the problem, he said. Not you. Leora didn't respond. She didn't need to. The lesson had already landed. Not through punishment, not through shame, but through truth, finally spoken without defense. Leora didn't move into a new life overnight. She integrated into an existing one. There were schedules to adjust, boundaries to respect, relationships to learn without forcing closeness. She spent time with Anise, the way she always had, and time with Verity in small, deliberate steps. Dinners happened. Conversations followed. Silence was allowed. She didn't arrive as a miracle or a solution. She arrived as a person. There were awkward moments, missed calls, misunderstood intentions, days when trust felt easy and days when it didn't. No one pretended otherwise. Thaddeus wasn't restored to his old life. He didn't reclaim his standing. Consequences remained. Healing didn't erase accountability. It simply allowed honesty to exist where lies once stood. Rebuilding meant work. Verity and Leora built a relationship slowly, without pressure. Brother and sister found their rhythm through shared time, not declarations. Anise stayed present, not as a placeholder, but as family. Nothing was perfect. Everything was real. Leora continued living the life she had already built. School, music, community, choice. She wasn't defined by what had been done to her. She was defined by who she chose to be, and those around her learned what should have been obvious from the beginning. Down syndrome was never the problem. Some stories end with redemption. This one ends with the truth. Subscribe to Stories by Mr. Gideon if you believe truth is louder than shame.